I would say that staff has to come back with a whole plan, how this is going to be done and how we can engage neighborhoods and all that stuff. Thank you. Councilmember Fisch.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor. Yeah, and thank you very much. I mean, I think this is a hard project, which is why, and welcome, Ms. Ramirez. I'm glad you joined us. I guess they didn't tell you what happened to the last person. I kid. You're going to have a good time. Yeah, you won't be bored. Yeah. This is a hard ask, so I'm not surprised that it's coming back as sort of as the first step. And I appreciate, I'm going to guess that the mayor asked that this be on the agenda so we don't lose track of it, because it has been, I think I first mentioned it, without doing that step of getting support, a couple of years ago. And, I appreciate the mayor actually calling the question, because there's been, I think we'll see some cracks in that, in the unity, but there's been unanimous, to this point, feedback from the community that what we need is to address the affordability crisis. And, I think that while one can debate, with against or with increasing unanimity from scholars, what the source of the housing crisis is, there's really no debating that deed-restricted affordable housing is, a powerful tool for providing housing affordability. So I think this is important. I think we need to pursue it. What I would suggest that sort of, I think, threads the needle is that we set aside some money in this year's budget to have consultants do this in parallel, so that staff can focus on, the backlog of work and just the enormous amount of work that's already in there. We've got, obviously, the general plan update process. That's got outreach in it. I think we need to be very careful about outreach, because I think it's becoming, I think that, again, there's increasing scholarly support for this, that a lot of our wise responses to the horrible overreach and racism of redevelopment long before anything this city did, but in the urban renewal days when Bunker Hill was leveled, when the Fillmore District in San Francisco was leveled, when Robert Moses was doing his thing in New York City, there was a pushback to that very top-down planning that involved more sort of local input, right? These community meetings that we all know. And while that was a good development, I think we're now, 50 years into seeing the negative effects of the new type of outreach that we've done. And so I think, I hate to keep adding stuff to the list, but I think we need new ways of doing outreach that really get at community sentiment and get us valuable stuff. Because, for example, mansionization, we spent $350,000 on consultants, not counting staff time. We got the actual in-person participation of not quite 100 people. That's $3,500 per perspective on what's a nice house and what's not a nice house. That's not a good use of the public's money. That's not a criticism of anybody here in the city, because that's the way we do things. It was a quality outreach process by that metric. But, if we're going into neighborhoods and saying, what type of affordable housing do you want, we're going to get several meetings where people say none. I think we know that. So I think we need to appeal to people's better angels and find a way that gets that input and gets the word out while getting quality feedback. For example, weighted polling, scientific surveys, not scientific, I don't want to overstate it, but demographically weighted, thoughtful, careful surveys to get people's sentiment. So long-winded way of saying, I think we need to put some money in the budget to this. The other reason that I think that's important is that really looking at the good layout of what's existing between state density bonus and our own community benefits incentives, we need to dial it in to figure out how do you provide that positive for the nonprofit developer. And that's obviously a moving target since we're changing stuff on the fly. So I think the process needs to happen with professional help. It needs to happen with some insight from developers who might actually do this. We need to think about what part of the puzzle are we answering for? And I think the answer is easy, that we're trying to appeal to light-tech developers, quote, capital affordable housing developers, which, has a pretty limited scope. We also need to think about, are there other models out there for housing construction that are starting to take off that we can breathe life into, enhance, allow, create opportunities for them to build deed-restricted, subsidized housing. other thing, that's really all I have, is that I think we should just put it in the budget for it and get some good information. Thank you. Thanks
Thank
for the
you.
report.
Vice Mayor Vera?
Thank you, Mayor. There's a lot to unpack here. Is this the time to start doing it? I don't think so. I think with everything on the table right now and what's going on with Project Home, can getting that up and running, I think this is really a huge ask that's going to take years to really dive into it. I understand what Councilmember Fisch is talking about, outreach but I believe all outreach is good outreach. I think the community wants to be heard, and then it's up to council how we decipher that, I think to limit the amount of outreach that we do does the community a disservice. One of the speakers was talking about height limits and making design standards. It's going to take a lot of time just to go through each one of these things. So I think outreach is extremely important, input from the community, from all members of the community, and transparency along the way. I'm not opposed to looking at this during the budget process and setting some money aside, but I think right now this is a huge ask of staff with their plate already full of everything that they're doing right now. So that's my comments, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll keep my comments brief, since this was an item that I proposed. It's probably fairly easy to guess how I feel, but in the context of the process, I think, I don't want to speak for any colleagues, but I feel like we all sort of assumed this is the first discussion about this item. I think we need to get a sense of whether or not the council agreed with moving forward first, before we spend a whole lot of money on outreach